As the rusty garage door slowly creaked open, Mindy's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The dim light filtering into the space revealed a sight so startling, so inexplicably out of place, that it shook her to her core. Her breath caught in her throat as her eyes struggled to make sense of what lay before her. The garage, once a mundane and forbidden structure in her childhood memories, now stood as the gateway to a reality that shattered everything she thought she knew about her Uncle Greg. For as long as she could remember, Uncle Greg had been an eccentric yet endearing presence in her life, full of quirks, odd preferences, and a larger-than-life personality that lit up every family gathering. But there was always one unspoken rule, one immovable boundary that hovered over his otherwise jovial existence. No one, under any circumstances, was ever to open the old garage. This strict command had haunted Mindy since she was a child. She remembered the one time, years ago, when curiosity nearly got the better of her. She had crept up to the garage, only to be met with her uncle's panicked, almost desperate voice shouting at her to stay away. At the time, she hadn't understood the intensity of his reaction. It had seemed overblown, maybe even dramatic. But now, standing inside the dark, musty space filled with mysterious items and clues she couldn't yet piece together, she understood. Uncle Greg had been hiding something far more complex and troubling than she could have imagined. The garage was no mere storage space. It was the heart of his secret, the core of a hidden life cloaked in layers of memory, pain, and unfinished stories. Greg had always been the favorite uncle, the man who danced wildly at weddings, told the most outrageous jokes, and never failed to bring laughter to any room he entered. His boundless energy made him a joy to be around, and he seemed to carry life's burdens lightly, at least on the surface. But beneath that joyful exterior was a man facing unimaginable hardship. At 65, Greg was diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of cancer. The news, devastating in its finality, did not change him overnight. But gradually, the cracks began to show. Though his friends and family urged him to seek treatment, to fight for more time, Greg refused. He couldn't bear the thought of losing the vibrant spirit that made him who he was. Instead, he chose solitude. He withdrew, spending hours alone in the house and, most notably, behind the door of that garage. His once frequent phone calls became rare, and the visits from loved ones dwindled to almost nothing, though not by their choice. One morning, overcome by a strange sense of urgency, Mindy decided to stop by his house before school. It was on her way, and she hadn't seen him in far too long. As she approached the quiet home, an unshakable feeling of dread settled over her. What if something had happened to him? What if he was lying somewhere inside, suffering in silence? The thought made her stomach twist. When she pressed the doorbell and heard movement, noises coming from the garage, relief swept over her. But that relief was short-lived. She made her way to the garage, crouched down, and began to lift the heavy door, only to be startled by her uncle's urgent voice barking from behind her. He stormed over, visibly shaken. "Don't even think about it," he snapped. "You and everyone else, your parents, Uncle Joey, stay away from the garage." His tone was final, his expression unreadable. Mindy, feeling slightly embarrassed, tried to smile and shrug it off. They chatted for a while, and she almost forgot the strange encounter, until she realized she was late for school and left in a rush, not knowing this would be the last time she would ever hug her uncle. A few days later, the call came. Uncle Greg had passed away. The news, though expected, sent waves of grief through the family. Mindy struggled to process the loss, but one thought kept resurfacing: the garage. She had told her parents about the odd encounter, but no one had brought it up since. The grief had overshadowed everything. But now, the silence surrounding that space only deepened the mystery. What could have been so important, so sacred, that even death hadn't erased the barrier? As time passed, the topic faded, unspoken among the adults. It wasn't until years later, when Mindy was 17, that her curiosity reignited. On a quiet afternoon, she took a nostalgic bike ride past Uncle Greg's old house. The sight of the untouched furniture through the living room windows struck her like a wave of frozen time. Nothing had changed. Not the pictures on the walls, not the scattered trinkets on the shelves. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for someone to exhale. She returned home and confronted her mother, who hesitated before confessing the truth. They hadn't brought themselves to touch the place. The emotional weight was too great. Mindy gently insisted that it was time. That weekend, with her mother and Uncle Joey in tow, they returned to the house, not just to clean, but to finally address the question that had hung in the air like a ghost for years. Yet even then, as they stepped up to the garage door, her mother stopped her. "He told us not to," she whispered, her voice a mixture of guilt and reverence. Mindy was stunned. "But he's gone," she protested. "The house has to be cleaned eventually." But the adults remained firm, as if haunted by a promise too sacred to break. Mindy felt the sting of their refusal. Her longing to know the truth was now tangled in something deeper: grief, loyalty, fear. As the weeks wore on, Mindy became consumed by the mystery. The garage seemed to call to her, each creak of its wooden boards a whisper from the past. At night, she found herself awake, replaying childhood memories of Uncle Greg disappearing into the garage for hours, always emerging with that distant look in his eyes. She began to notice the glances her mother stole toward the garage during visits, eyes full of silent yearning. It became clear that whatever lay behind that door was not just a physical object, but something tied to emotion, to trauma, to love. One night, unable to sleep, Mindy overheard her mother and Uncle Joey whispering. Words like, "promise," "Greg's wishes," "let it be," floated through the walls. That's when she understood. They had made a vow to him, one they were still afraid to break. But Mindy couldn't let it go. She wasn't afraid. She was determined. The garage wasn't just a room full of dust and shadows. It was a final message from Uncle Greg, a chapter he hadn't been able to finish. And no matter what secrets it held, she knew in her heart she had to uncover the truth. Not for the sake of gossip or curiosity, but for closure, for understanding, for love.